You've got me trained, Mr. Moore.
And then now, just won't give me what I want. Didn't bring the thing up.
Use your mouse, hit that, the Chrome.
Oh, for God's sake.
Maybe you wanna put on the keyboard. Your mic's on, Maria.
For which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Could I have a motion to approve this evening's agenda, please?
So moved.
That goes to Mr. Souchaki. I'll second. Are there any changes or additions, Mr. Muccio or Mr. Evans? None?
No.
Okay, so let's move to a vote then, please. Roll call.
Mr. Souchaki?
Aye.
Mr. Dodd?
Aye.
Mrs. Decker?
Aye.
Mrs. Etter?
Aye.
Ms. Press?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to agenda item number 3, presentations, and I turn the floor over to Mr. Evans and Mr. Muccio.
Righty. We prepared a little presentation on funding sources for Cuyahoga Heights Schools. I'm afraid to get up and move around because with everybody's, I'm not sure. I can make sure that it's working this way, I will. Absolutely. Nice. Okay, funding sources for Cuyahoga Heights Schools, current legislative initiatives threatening funding to our district. And I was trying to, even from the start, trying to figure out some wording that was best for that, and it is a threat to our district. I guess there's no other way to soften that up, but it's a threat to the district. And as Matt and I look at this, we start getting a little bit of a complex, because it's like, this is all, a lot of it directed directly at us. And you know, we both advocated for the Fair School Funding Plan, and as we'll see here, I don't know that we're getting a very fair end of the Fair School Funding Plan. Believe me, my volume's loud enough, Maria, that I think the mic will pick it up. So revenue streams versus legislative threats to those funding. Let me see if I can get the pointer to work here. If not, I'm gonna sit back. There's about 5 pages of calculations that they use, and the irony of this was the calculated base cost. Our guarantee with, before they start adding in ELL and the rest of those costs, is about $320 per student. When they start adding in some of those other costs, that's 5% of the calculated amount. Cuyahoga Heights is on the guarantee. Districts all around the state are on the guarantee, but we are one. We're only one of 7 districts in Ohio that receive less than $1 million in funding from the state of Ohio. And I'm going to back up here. This is actually, there's actually 6, I've got 6 listed here because there's a combination. Kelly's Island gets $108,000. Kelly's Island has 8 students. Their ADM is 8 students, they get $108,000 from the state. Put-in Bay has 42 students, they get $121,000. Now, Put-in Bay also includes South Bass and Middle Bass Islands. Technically, those school districts are listed with the state, but they're technically closed, and those students go to Put-in. Non-public school funding. Non-public schools receive just over $1,400, and I think Mr. Muccio was at a meeting last week where he got the same number I got. I think it's $1,462 per student. That's Trinity, St. Ignatius, St. Ed's, Holy Name. They get $1,400 per student. And my understanding is that's the elementaries as well. Considered an administrative fee from the state of Ohio, that's approximately double what we receive. On 2 occasions, it's been in legislation, it's been on the governor's desk to at least have no school less than what this administrative fee is. And on both occasions, the governor lied on and vetoed it. One without an explanation, and one he said that, I think it got back to the districts that those were affluent districts and they didn't need that administrative fee. So that's a little frustrating as well. The TPP phase-out, we know, is a threat to the district. And, you know, with the TPP phase-out, is this the old floor tax? It used to be the first couple weeks of January, all the industry would get taxed on whatever they had on the floor. Remember that was when everybody had their car sales because they were trying to get inventory off the floor because they got taxed on it. Well, the state said, we're going to take that away. We're going to eliminate that. Well, those were local funds. The state eliminated local funds, and so they just took money away from our district. What they did it as a phase-out. So that money is currently being phased out at a rate of $213, $213,319 a month until we get to zero, which is the year 2031. This year we'll receive 1.5 million. Originally, we're over $3 million of $3 million of our budget was DPP money.
So Tom, I just want to add on to that point. This change in state law that happened almost 20 years ago, my understanding is that that is one of the consequences of a fairly gradual shift in taxation as to who pays what taxes away from.
When we talk about HB1, I'm going to talk about a little bit. Matt's going to go into some more depth. You're going to see some more of that as well.
Okay, so what my conclusion is, you think is supported by.
Absolutely, and quite honestly, at our expense. So again, this is money that we have lost. This isn't money that we've misspent. This is money that's kind of been taken out of our district by the powers that be in Columbus.
Okay, thank you. And that inventory tax, they got rid of was back in the early part of the aught decade, right?
Yes, and
03, 04, 05,
right,
something like that?
And I know 3 years ago, we were one of 60 schools left that were still receiving those funds. I know that number's less than 60 schools right now, and I know that the Alliance has every year gone to the legislature and to the governor and said, if you just freeze it right where it's at and leave the remaining schools on it, we're okay, because the schools that are left on it, us, for example, I think Solon's another a big district that gets a pretty fair amount of money through the TPP phase out. It just, in the end, it will have been devastating to their overall budget.
And just to kind of drive that point home, my understanding, if you take that $3 million that is going away, my understanding is that at the point in time that we were getting about $3 million, that our annual budget was roughly, I'm just to say 15, maybe not even that much.
Correct.
So that's what, 20%?
20-25% of the budget. I think the one number I looked at was about 25% of the budget when all this started shifting going. No, those are great points.
Are we still on the list of school districts getting money because we were getting more from it?
Yes, because our phase out was gonna take longer. The schools that were getting less got phased out much quicker. So the schools got phased out at different rates.
Okay.
So. Property tax million. Property taxes. Cuyahoga Heights receives $9 million of its funds through property taxes. And this is the primary funds for our district. We have the second lowest tax base in the county. Independence is it's not a full mill, I think it's less than a full mill, less than us. Independence will be on the ballot this spring with a renewal and probably 5 mills of new money. They would go ahead of us. So the next closest district to us is Brooklyn, which is almost double our tax base. So we're in the, 35, we're 35, Brooklyn's at 55, Shaker's the highest, they're like 181 or 183 is their tax base. And HB1 is attempting to take away local property taxes in the end, and I don't know, Matt and I sat and scratched our heads over this. We'll talk a little bit about HB1 here, and the $500,000 is, it's somewhere between, Matt's going to talk more about it. That's not an accurate number. It could be less than that. It could be a whole lot more than that, quite honestly, depending on how things are interpreted. HB1, what's it all about? Well, it's about a flat tax rate, 2.75%. That's a great idea, right? Everybody, flat tax, income tax rate in the state of Ohio for everybody. What a great idea. Well, how are they going to fund that? They're not going to fund it right now. The state has never been more flush than it is right now. The state has an estimated $6 billion surplus. You know, if we remember, as COVID set in, the rainy day fund was almost maxed out. Well, the rainy day fund has since maxed out, and the governor said, we're not going to touch it because we're going to need it during COVID. They didn't touch a penny of the rainy day fund during COVID. So if we didn't use the rainy day fund during COVID, when are we going to use it? And right now, like $6 billion. So the way that the state's going to pay for that flat tax is to take property tax money and divert it to the state. And this is where they're running into some snags with that. It takes money from every school district in the state, and local municipalities, and as Mr. Mucho and I were just talking about earlier, also the metro parks. And we know the Cleveland Zoo, they get hit pretty hard with this too. And I talked to them, at least one of the mayors about this. I said, are you concerned with this at all? He said, we are, but we don't know what the numbers are. We can't, because quite honestly, The sponsors of this bill don't know what the numbers are. When some of them were questioned directly, they couldn't give the numbers and the impact on districts. So that certainly, they want the 2.75, but they don't know the effect it's gonna have on people. This spring, you know, it could hit, at $500,000, that could be as much as 10% of our annual budget at some point.
Go ahead, please.
House Bill 920, passed back in the 1970s, was passed by the voters in the state of Ohio. That said that, that millage was frozen. In other words, when you pass 8 mills and you're gonna collect $4 million for 8 mills, that's all you'll ever collect is that $4 million. So as property taxes go up, the millage didn't rise, because there was a time as communities grew, the property taxes rose and communities received more money. 920 froze it. So if whatever is past millage, whatever that collectible amount is, that's the number that stays on the books for the length of that voting millage. So that froze something. So that throws a little bit of kink into this, because if it goes down, then HB 920 says up or down. And technically, if it goes up, they would have to override 920 to add property taxes to the local constituents, and they would do, and that will end up in the House Supreme Court. They can't arbitrarily override a vote of the people.
But if they didn't, then it would wait till we pass the levy, right?
Correct.
But then if we pass the levy, we would end up also kind of losing money, like you have to pass the levy.
They're gonna put money, they're gonna put it back on us to pass, so then we would have to, school districts, and one of the things that Matt's trying to get cleared up right now, we know they're talking about class 1, which is residential. But we also believe it's class 2, which is huge, which would, on our end. But the actual effect of 920, they haven't come out and said, and that's why we'd hoped to watch the testimony yesterday, because I was hopeful that someone would ask the effect of 920 on this legislation, and I didn't get anything in the form of an update today, and I know yesterday was testimony, so we're gonna kind of wait. Matt, anything to add on that?
I'll jump into the calculator later on.
Tom, one other thing I wanted to mention, and again, tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Ohio currently has a graduated income tax rate.
Correct.
Or income tax, and that I think the highest rate is somewhere approaching 4% of one's income. And so this proposal, if it's adopted, would go, basically take the highest level from roughly 4% down to 2 3/4. And so that gap that people are sensing that needs to be filled arises from people that may be, not people, but taxpayers may be having a 4% viability by law being capped at 2 3/4, which creates that gap, if you will, and the mechanism to fix that gap or fill it right now is they're talking about doing it through the tax.
Right. To my knowledge, there's only 4 or 5 states that have no income tax. One of them is Florida. The reason Florida doesn't have an income tax is because of tourism. They stuff their coffers with tourism tax money, and they're able to do that. We don't have that we don't have that alternate source here in Ohio. Hence, we rely on property taxes. But rumors are that the end goal of this legislation, somewhere down the road, is that Ohio will no longer have an income tax. And, different states do it differently. I know Pennsylvania has no sales tax at all, so things are diverted a different way. So each state to his own on that. We talk about the tuition program, tuition income. This fiscal year, we'll receive about $650,000 to our tuition program. Note that we get $632 from the state. Our tuition program generates more income to the district than the state on its per pupil funding basis. And our tuition program is at capacity. We've got some singular openings and some grades, but it's not where we can take in another 100 students that would make another $200,000 difference. That's not where, there's not a lot of room for growth there. Our growth would be minimal, even with the raise in the tuition increase for this year. So, as far as that kind of bailing us out on some of these things, actually, the tuition program's done a really nice job of kind of offsetting some of these losses kind of quietly up to this point. But it's at its end as far as its growth potential outside of the maybe some annual raises to the individual tuition, because the goal of the tuition program, again, was not to add additional expenses by adding teachers, and to fill empty seats in the district. So the backpack bill. The proposed backpack bill is designed to have the money follow the student. You're gonna hear that a lot. Money's gonna follow the student. Well, what money? We already said that we're gonna get about $800 per student. So does that mean if one of our kids goes someplace else, they'll get $800? It expands the voucher program to 400% of the poverty level. That's approximately 80% of the Ohio families would qualify for backpack money. In other words, families that, and I use this example, and my granddaughter is in a Catholic school. Her mom and dad, from the get-go, wanted her to get a Catholic education. Has never ever stepped foot, she's in 5th grade, never stepped foot in a public school. By this, they would be eligible for backpack money. And why wouldn't you take it? If the state's gonna say, well, we'll give you $5,500 of her tuition, which is almost her entire amount of tuition amount where she goes to school right now, why would families say no to that? No, we'd rather pay it ourselves. So this is gonna qualify families that never ever have had students step foot into a public school for those monies. And
What's the 400%, what is it now?
it's worth, what, 200% right now, Matt? It's gonna double it? I think we're about at 200% right now.
I think you're right.
Do we have any sense what impact this law, if it's adopted, would have on our program? And I understand it's conjecture.
No, because there's actually, in the far off part of this, depending on how they gerrymander this, we could benefit, quite honestly. In other words, if our tuition students are then allowed to bring backpack money to us.
Do we get
Yeah,
benefits
but
today?
would they?
No, we don't.
Will they? They
We
don't
don't
today.
believe that'll be the case, that's
Yeah.
never been the case.
Yeah, I would
But if they're gonna
agree.
say the money follows the student, and that's their mantra, the money follows the student, well, if it's gonna follow them to a charter school, what if it follows them from a public school to a public school?
Yeah, they'll argue against it.
So, and not so much to stop what we're doing, but I think it's more of a, to kind of slow down the open enrollment that's out there. And we know that through the fair funding plan, that some of those schools that have had kind of a jackpot with open enrollment, that's gonna level off through the fair funding plan. It's not gonna be as big a cash cow as it once was. So that benefit for those, Findlay's a big one. A lot of kids from Findlay City Schools, Liberty Benton, one of the biggest beneficiaries. At one time, Liberty Benton was about our size. Now it's probably more than double because it's so close that a lot of the families have taken it and gone to Liberty Benton because Findlay was it's an open enrollment district. So that money, that base funding will follow the student there. Now these are whole different funds, $7,500. The estimated cost to fund this, $1.1 billion. Now, they would do it $500 million at a time, but again, where does the money come from? They haven't even said about where the money's gonna come from yet. We already know with the state income tax, that they've already figured out a way to try to fund that through property taxes. They're certainly not gonna use that $6 billion in the black that they're at right now. They're not gonna go into the rainy day fund to fund this. They're gonna find a way to fund this, and that's what gets scary. Because that's, once again, where we get hurt in the equation with this kind of
Double, because we're already gonna get hurt.
right. So those are just some of the things those are just 2 or 3 of the pieces of legislation that are on the table right now to deal with finances that really have a big impact on us. What are the takeaways from this? We want it to be real simple. These are not issues of over expenditure on our part. We're not buying Mercedes-Benz school buses. We're doing everything we can to apply for grant money. So this is local funding, local monies being taken out of the district by the state. A positive to this whole thing, we're a debt-free district. We don't have any bonds, we don't have any loans, we don't have any of that hanging over our head right now. But right now, again, the TPP phase out is going to continue on. These other bills, the backpack and HB1, look like they can, and especially at a time when we know that we're going to need to be on a ballot somewhere in the near future. How do you do that? To say, the first time we're on the ballot, we had to make up for the money that the state kind of took away from you property tax wise, because we got to make up that difference somehow. But again, every school district in the state of Ohio would be affected, and townships more so than cities, but but also, as in Metro Parks and those types of things would all be affected by this. And Matt's gonna go into the, HB one a little bit more, get down in the weeds on that. So, this is a brief presentation. I'm gonna go through this with the staff next Friday. So, you know, I told some of the staff members, and, you know, Al Martin's on the finance committee, and Al's always paid close attention to this, but as a classroom teacher, all I cared about is that my paycheck was in my checking account every 2 weeks. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what was going on in Columbus. It didn't affect me directly. And as long as things were going well at school, whatever school I was at, things seemed fine. When it came time to pass levies, we helped pass levies. And the district knew that. I think the staff needs to know that, you know, these are just outright attacks on our funding sources. And it really, I get really defensive about it. We've been a model. I would think we should be something that the state would want to emulate at some point in time, our small class sizes and the success we have for such a district that has a moderate income. You know, we're not a high income, high test score, which is what the demographics normally tell you. We kind of break that curve. I would think the state would want to come and say, hey, what are you guys doing that we can maybe translate to other districts? But instead they're saying, no, we're just going to start chipping away at some of your funding. You don't need this. You're a property-rich little district. And this kind of, you know, a previous governor came out and said, I want less school districts in the state of Ohio. And at that point in time, I think probably during his tenure, maybe 10 to 15 smaller districts consolidated. You know, Cadiz and Harrison, they really went after some schools in southeast Ohio, down in the Appalachian. I think some of the school districts down there that were, where you had 4 or 5 schools to a county, kind of did some consolidation down there. And we kind of dodged the bullet at that time. They weren't able to come at us, but this just feels like an attack, quite honestly. And I hope I'm not being paranoid about that, but it's difficult to see the upside of this for us as a school district.
I'm trying to figure out what's the reason and the rationale behind the state of Ohio making it more difficult for public education. They should be making it more easy, not more difficult, to sustain the districts financially.
And you know, when it comes to the charter, this several years ago, they said Ohio was the wild, wild west of charter schools. But a lot of this, especially the backpack bill, didn't the state go through a huge scandal with ECOT where they were just giving money and there was no level of accountability? This to me smells a little bit like ECOT.
That's what I'm saying.
And the other thing that we've argued as part of the alliance is there's no accountability by any of these schools. They're going to take $7,500. They're not going to state test. They don't do SAT, ACT. They don't submit any kind of scores. They don't get audited by the state of Ohio. So they're going to take a $7,500 check and spend it however they want to spend it. You know, Matt's going to talk about the auditor today, and we're still working on audits from 3 years ago, and we've had clean audits. But we're going to turn around and hand bag full of monies to non-public schools with no level of accountability to say spend it as you need to spend it. That just seems absurd to me.
You know, I don't understand how they can even, in any kind of breath, say it's fair funding for the schools, when it's obviously slanted towards the non-public, parochial, and voucher schools. I mean, there's nothing fair about it. If it was fair, every student would get the same amount of money, period.
So those are some of the battles in front of us. So, you know, Matt and I talked this week about we're going to put together some talking points, and we're going to start distributing some legislators' addresses to start sending some stuff in. When's some of this stuff going to happen? Ultimately, they want to roll House Bill 1 in the governor's budget proposal. We know that doesn't get approved or finalized until June, so that's going to be in the process. The backpack bill, the Alliance has told us and Bass has told us that that's going to happen. That supermajority down in Columbus has said we're going to make this happen somehow. So we're going to have to continue to work with the legislature to see what we can do to curb that, what we can do to see if we can somehow benefit from it in some way. But the powers that be right now are saying that people that have their finger on the pulse, saying that they're gonna find a way to make that backpack bill in some form happen. And obviously they've got to find a way to fund it at $500 million. You know, if they have the ability to, but history says they won't do it that way. That they're gonna find another
I don't know if I missed it, but the property tax valuation percentage going down from 35 to 31.5.
31.5. Matt's gonna talk about, when he talks about
Okay,
HB1.
because I think that's gonna cost us even more than what we've just been talking
No,
about.
that's part of HB1, and Matt's gonna break that down a little bit for you.
Yeah, okay.
And when he goes through that, so. And, you know, we've benefited from grants, and we've applied for grants all along. Grants are not school funding. If they wanna help us funding-wise, that's the fair funding formula, that's a per-student formula that ensures money. Grant money comes and goes. And Matt oftentimes talks about, rightfully so, that a lot of your safety services, police and fire, will get grants, and then they'll do it to hire on more people, because they're primarily a service group. And then when those grants run out, then they've got to pass levies to keep those people on. They just can't come and go with that. Now, with some of our grant money, we were able to use it for the air conditioning, but we also, on some levels, we had to document where we were closing learning gaps. We did bring some people on with some of that money. Some other areas, you know, I know that, I laud the governor for what he's trying to do with safety, to improve safety. Well, the amount of safety money that we're gonna get for an SRO is $14,000. Now, this,
Here.
$14,000 a year. Now, the state has calculated that that an average SRO costs the school district $94,000. So where's the other $80,000 come from? It's gonna come from us if we want an SRO. So they're gonna give us a grant for $17,000, it's not $14,000. $17,000, we gotta pick up the rest, and then when the grant goes away, we have the whole amount, and this is a targeted grant. We can't use that, at least up to this point, we can't use that grant money for anything else. We're still looking into it. My thought was, you know, our safety services, if I can get some of that money to use, to our local safety force to come and do some educational programs for it, it's gotta be SRO money. It's gotta be SRO, and quite honestly, the services that we get right now, knock on wood, are better than SRO services. The random patrols and the services that we get from our three villages far exceed what an SRO would provide for us. So it's, and as Matt has continued to tell us, the grant money, yeah, it's great, but it's a lot more work for his department. You know, back when especially when it's targeted grants. And a lot of this money is targeted by the state. So he's got, when Matt accounts for upstairs, he's gotta make sure he's accounting for it in the right columns in the right way, because that's the first thing that the auditors are gonna look at. And that's a whole separate audit. Grant audits are a whole separate audit than maybe the regular audit that Matt might go through upstairs. So it's making his life a whole lot more difficult. There's already a shortage of treasurers in the state of Ohio. I can't imagine anybody will say, hey, I wanna go do that job, and have the state come and audit me 2 or 3 times a year on grants, and then on my budget, and then on, you know, anything else, and when they're handing bags of money over to private schools with
Do
no
they do
accountability.
the audits on the voucher schools too?
No,
Oh,
No.
and the parochial schools?
no,
Oh,
No.
just wondered.
no. So, you know, there's some challenges in front of us. We're working with as many groups as possible. Again, and I'm gonna talk about that in my section a little bit later, about the equity and adequacy for funding, but, you know, the Alliance is well aware of this, because quite honestly, the 60 schools that are members of the Alliance are the schools that are hardest hit by some of these issues right here. So, you know, they're constantly working with it. Bass is working with us. You see OSBA, you see the emails. All those groups opposes the treasurer's group. They all oppose this legislation. It's gonna have to be a concerted effort, and I think we're gonna have to target, quite honestly, because I know that there's legislators. I know that the Manning from Lorraine County, she's a former teacher. And when education issues are brought to her, she really comes about it with a really common sense approach. So she'll step away from that supermajority and do what's right for school districts in the big picture, because she represents, you know, 14 school districts in Lorraine County that are all having the same struggles everybody else is having dollars-wise. So I wish I had brighter news for you.
Really?
So right now, tuition student, we get $800.
With the fair school funding, great question, Jen. We didn't before. With the fair school funding plan, we do.
Okay. But if they decide they would rather go to another school, they'll get $7,500.
Right. Because we've had, that's one of the calls that we get on a regular basis. Do you guys accept vouchers? Well, no, we don't. So because those families can't afford it without the voucher money, you know, so they end up at the Trinities and including some Catholics in those schools. because they take that. The problem's gonna be with, none of the parochial high schools are at $7,500 for tuition. I think the lowest that I found when we did some research is 10,000. They're not gonna take that as payment in full, 7,500. And the state was originally trying to say, well, you gotta take it as payment in full, and the Catholics said, no, you can't make us take that as payment in full. So if a kid's gonna take 7,500 down to St. Ignatius, he's still gonna have to come up with another $9,000, because that's what it costs to go to school down there. He's gonna have to come up with a difference. If he's gonna take the $7,500 and go to Trinity, he's probably gonna have to come up with $2,000 or $3,000 difference. The family is, so. And again, our low tuition has made us a more viable option for some of those families. Anything else?
I don't know where to begin.
Sorry to spread all that sunshine on this Wednesday night, so.
Well, please keep us, you've done a good job of keeping us informed, please continue to do so, and in particular, if and as these measures develop, please let us know. I'll note that the OSBA had asked the legislative liaisons to reach out to representatives on Senate Bill 1, which had the effect of moving the Department of Education functionally underneath the governor, and I called a half a dozen or more senators on the morning that law, that bill was ultimately adopted by the Senate. So I'm trying to do our part to let our voice be known on these matters, but please keep
Well,
us
and
informed.
quite honestly, it worked before Christmas. Because quite honestly, they told us it was gonna go through in lame duck, and it didn't.
Right.
It got stalled. So I think there are some legislators down there saying, yeah, let's take a deep breath and let's take a look at this. So I think that they're swinging a big bat because they got a super majority, but I don't know that everybody's on board with some of these initiatives. So I think what's gonna be important for us is to make sure that we target some of those that have been more responsive to education. I don't know where Matt Dolan is on this stuff. Matt's always been kind of a straight shooter with us, with me at least, when we talked about some of these issues. I know where Phil Robinson is on it. Phil's a big public school advocate. I don't know I haven't met our new representative yet. I'm trying to reach out to him. But there's also some others that we know. Bill Blessing down in Cincinnati has been a public school promoter. Manning out in Lorraine County, both Mannings. Nate Manning's in the Senate. His mom's in the House. Have both been public school supporters out there. So I think we got to get to them and say, we know that you're part of the supermajority, but you're really, what's happening is going to hurt your schools, all public schools, 609 public school districts in the state of Ohio. A lot of almost every municipality, they're going to get hurt badly with some of this stuff. And then how do you explain that to the voters? Voters don't want to hear that. Well, the state took money away from us. What do you mean they took money away from you? Well, they did. They did without, we didn't get a say in it.
And they're doing it at a time when inflation is on the rise.
Yeah, so. That's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you. Please feel free to do additional presentations like this if and as, the need warrants.
I'm gonna do this.
It's helpful.
The teachers are gonna see this. Best is gonna see this. I'm gonna try and get to each of the villages here in the next month or so to say, I wanna talk to their clerk treasurers first, because I don't want to blindside a clerk treasurer. I don't want a council asking them, how much are we gonna lose in this, and them not know. I wanna, Carol I know real well. I know Angel across the street and Mr. Frank down in, so I know the three of them. So I wanna make sure that when I come out to talk to them, they're aware of what kind of impact it's gonna have on them as a community.
And when you do go to those meetings, let us know, because we'd like to be there in support for you.
Matt,
Do you have some more good
bring
news
some
for us?
sunshine, man, bring some sunshine.
Yeah, I'll talk about 7B right now, which is just the OASBO calculator. If everybody's able to click on 7B, we have an attachment and we have some public comment. So I'll just kind of read it. On Monday, March 6th, 2023, so a couple days ago, OASBO, which is the Ohio Association of School Business Officials, sent out a calculator which shows the impact of HB1. More specifically, it shows HB1's interpretation of scenario number 1 of HB 920 applying and its effect on inside millage and class 1 outside millage, but not class 2 outside millage. There's a lot there, so I won't read too much on the specifics yet. If everybody's able to click on the first attachment that they see there, that HB1. So there are 4 slides that make that up. The very first one's the presentation by OASBO. In it, and that's not the greatest picture of Katie Johnson, so I'll have to apologize to her if she ever sees this, when I snapped it. But there are essentially two interpretations for HB1. So Mr. Evans did a great job talking about HB1. Basically, yeah, the state wants to do a flat tax, and when they do this flat tax, they're gonna stop sending over the rollback credits to school districts. That's one of the aspects that they wanna do, as well as reduce the, assessed valuation percentage from 35%, which it's been now and for the past, I wanna say, over 40 years, to a 31.5% valuation amount. So that means valuations for homes. Now, as everybody started crunching the numbers, and for the first, I want to say, 2 weeks, nobody really had any grasp because it didn't make any sense. So Dr. Howard Flater is somebody who deals with school finances. From what I heard this past weekend at the ALAS conference, it took him a week to try to understand it, and I don't think he does understand it. You know, there have been superintendents, one that presented at the ALAS conference, Paul Imhoff.
And off there.
He said that this is one of the, in his, 30-some years experience, this is one of the largest threats he's ever seen to public school funding. So HB1 is boggling a lot of minds, and it's massive, from what everybody can tell. So when everybody starts crunching the numbers into it, well, they're saying, well, if you drop the percentage, that means schools are gonna collect less money. That really can't happen because those levies are essentially frozen in the first year in which they happen, which is what's called HB 920, when it was passed in the 70s. So everybody's kind of taking the approach that there's two interpretations, and that's what we have from this slide right here, one or two. So interpretation one just means that HB 920 applies. So everybody's collecting, let's say, a levy from 2012 generated $3 million. Well, we're still collecting $3 million to this day, roughly, on it. So that just means, if it drops from 35 to 31.5, we're still collecting $3 million. Well, if that happens, property taxes go up. So that's not really a winning strategy on people, and that's not the intent for what they're trying to do. They're trying to lower taxes from what they came out and said. So their intent, though, is implementation number two, which is HB 920 not applying. Well, as we can see from the slide, if it doesn't apply, it results in a tax increase to property taxpayers depending on some different aspects of the levies. There's a large decrease to local governments with greatest impact to schools, right there. So those two are just catastrophic to us if they happen.
Wait, so property taxpayers would pay more?
Yes.
But we would still get less?
Yes. I'll show you on the next slide. Yeah, I know. It's,
Okay.
in essence, it's very silly, the whole law, and it's funny math. So,
I thought their whole intent was to show that they were lowering property taxes.
No,
But
there's
that
lowering
was the
income
intent.
tax.
right. income tax.
They're lowering income tax, and they're gonna pay for it with property tax money. So they're.
And
they're-
reduce.
They're playing a shell game.
And reduce the
Would-
amount that schools would get.
Right.
From 35 to 31.5%.
Yeah, and I'll talk more about it in the next couple slides, and there's only 4. So let's go to the second one. So if we look at this, this is the calculator that came out, and I just want to applaud the two treasurers that worked on this, because it would have taken them a very long time to have this work for all the school districts. And this calculator is the second, we don't have to click on it now, but it's the second attachment in the board agenda in Excel, so anybody can use that. But what this shows, this calculator, is every school district in the state and what the impact would be. So this is a great talking point that all of the schools can use to say, this is gonna affect us in this negative light. So we're looking at it, for us, we can see at the very top how it's set up. They have the whole amounts of our assessed value. So what it is for class 1, class 2, which class 1 is 119 million, class 2 is 234 million, and they're using a different tax year for PUP, but PUP's not really included, so I'll skip that. So we can see the 35% for class 1 and class 2. What they want to do is take our valuation down to 31.5. So that drops it from 119 million for class 1 to 107 million for class 1, with that drop from 35 to 31.5. And remember, class 1 is residential and agriculture. Now, class two, we can see it going from 234 million to 211 million. And class two is gonna be our commercial industrial properties that we have. So, we see all of our levies there, below, the full tax rate, our effective rates, whether it's eligible for rollbacks, all of ours are. That law didn't go into effect till, I wanna say, 2018-ish, give or take, I think 15-ish. And then we see the last two columns, and those are really the ones I wanna point out. So we can see the increase to class one, which is residential and agriculture taxpayers, would be 254,000 just for us alone. So our residents that live in the communities here, if HB 920 applies, which is, it's in the Constitution, so we have to collect the same amount on these levies before when they were passed. So if the state drops it from the current tax to a flat tax, property tax owners are gonna have to make up that difference. So that's the 254,000 that we see. Also, in that last column is a negative 145,000. Now, that's our revenue loss according to us, and that just deals with inside millage. And I'll talk more about that in the third slide too, the math behind it. But that's the actual loss to us. So we lose, even if HB 920 applies, a certain portion of inside millage, and that's just, it's taken away from our budget. That's a large amount in a $15-20 million school district budget that we have. Now, one thing great on this slide too is if we look at the very bottom, there's a $635 million figure and a negative $182 million figure. So that's the tangible impact from a tool that's used statewide for every school district, and we can say with relative assurance that if this bill, as introduced, proposed, would go through, it's OASBO, because they released this calculator, which represents school business officials, treasurers. It's their belief that school districts would have to ask taxpayers, in essence, for $635 million just to make up where we were at. Also, all school districts in the state, to some degree, would lose money. We would lose $145,000. Statewide, that would be $182 million. So if we are, going down our path with this, we have a great tool, this calculator, that we can say, this is the statewide impact, this is our district impact, if we wanted to do, say, for example, a resolution in opposition to HB 1. And we can look to the Alliance for High Quality in other school districts. Maybe they start with those resolutions in opposition, and we kind of copy that. We want to say, we oppose losing money, we oppose raising property taxes through this bill. We don't feel that that's the best way forward.
Hey, Matt, so
Yeah.
this 254,000 and change
Yep.
increase, that's just on what we get? That doesn't include the fact that they're also raising it?
Yeah, maybe this third slide will really clear it up too. So this third slide that we have here, it looks familiar because this is the tool that I use for our alternative tax budget in January of every year. But what I did is I separated it again in two halves, but the top half, if we look in the very left-hand corner, it's without HB 1. So this is just as it is for our school district, in the very top. The bottom half is interpretation number 1 from HB 1, and I'll go through this. So the top half that we're looking at, so it's just as is, we can see in the purple that we have there that we're collecting $13,045,423, and that's in tax year 2022. So that's using our valuation of $437 million that we have. So these are the amounts that we're collecting, the $13 million. Our valuation here in the top half, that $437 million that we can see, is what it is, and that's coming from Cuyahoga County. And we can see the separation for each class. It's class 1, 2, and public utility personal property, but I'll kind of skip that. Now, the very first row is inside millage, which is non-voted. We get that in the Constitution. All the other ones, where it's kind of rolled up and subtotal here, would be our outside millage that we have. totaled up here at the bottom. So again, that's our 13,045,423. Now, if we were to go down to see the second half of the sheet, thank you. Perfect. We can see the interpretation number one. Now, this is the better of the two, and it's still bad. So, these boxes here, I did the math to kind of see where they got their figures from in the calculator. Now, let's take a look at that 754,568, which is right here in the red. So what we're doing is we're taking A and subtracting B from it, which gets us that. Now, A and B, A is right here, and B is right here. So, when I plug in the new valuation numbers down here, the 107 million and the 211 million for class 1 and class 2, it drops the overall valuation from 437 million to 402 million. And that's about an 8% decrease that we can see right here. So what it does is I actually program all these calculations by hand, by myself. It's kind of cool when you know how the math works. So when I did that, what it did is you can see the effect over here. So these amounts drop right here. So what happens is what's called the outside voted millage. So on all of our levies, let's just look at 2012, the most recent levy. What we were collecting from class 1 was 772,000. Well, with this change, we're collecting 695,000. So there's a drop right there. And that drop is reflected back in that calculator for each one of those. So if we were to subtract it, we can see where, if we go up a little bit, maybe to that second slide, right down here. So if we do the math, the 47, 21, 77, that's it. So we just subtract those two. So if we go back down to that third slide, sorry about that. Cool. So that's how they're arriving at the 254,568. What we're saying is, and let's just use that 2012 levy for an example, where we're currently at, where we would go. And for all of our levies that are voted, it totals up to that 254,000. So in essence, if it passes, we would have to go back out and ask the community for a levy that generates 254,000 just to make up what the state would take away from us in property taxes. Now, there's another number too, which is 145,000, which is right here. Now, that's arrived at from C and take away D, so subtract D from it, C and D. So what we're saying here is C is the total of our amount that we receive for inside millage. So again, that's provided to us by the state, that's our 4.1, that's our starting. You know, if we never passed the levy, could we live off the inside mills what the state gives us? No school really can, so that's why you go for property tax levies, because you need just more funds that we have. So what happens is, the valuation drops, so it went from 437 million to 402 million. The inside mills, the effect that we would see right here, well, it goes from 488,000 for class 1 and 962,000 for class 2, down. So it goes from 488 to 439, and from 962 to 866. And that's the 145,000 loss that we have right there. So the inside millage amount drops for us if this is passed. If we go back to board docs too.
Real quick,
Yes.
Nick, sorry.
Yeah.
If you look at the
Sure.
two purple,
Yeah,
up top you got 13,045,000, then
Yes.
down below you got 12,041,000.
where's the other difference?
Where's the million
Yeah.
difference?
So it's here, it's class 2. So I'll show you guys that.
Okay.
So if we go back to the agenda, yeah, so we're seeing the 254, and we just walked through that, right? So we're subtracting 2.5 and 2.2, and that's how we got the 254,000. And again, that was A, and subtract B from A, and that gives us this. And then the second bullet point is the 145,000, and we were subtracting C and D, so C minus D from our sheet that we had, and that gave us the inside millage of 154,000. This right here is what that calculator wasn't showing. They didn't have a column in that calculator for class 2, which would go right here. And I called them up and I said, hey, you guys, we have a great tool. They throw the numbers in, and they're like, well, we just did this in our own time. That's kind of, I'm like, well, you guys did a great job. I'll help out. But they're going to see what they can do for class 2. But for us, if we use the same methodology, right? So we go back and we look at that HB1 calculator, that third slide, perfect. If we take our 6,044,000 right here,
Mm-hmm.
and we subtract this figure, 5.4, so 5,439,000. From there, we get about, what is that, 600,000 I had?
604.
Yep. So that is the difference for class two, if we use the same methodology. So that makes up altogether the difference between our 13 million that we had to our 12 million. So it's not only class one, which is residential and agriculture, that would see an increase in property taxes. It would also be, what we think, would be commercial and industrial, a rise in their property taxes as well. But again, there's a lot of interpretations, and a lot of people aren't exactly sure how this proposed legislation would work. But we're trying our best to figure out, what their intent is. Now, that's if it does apply HB 920. If it doesn't, my last sentence there, if HB 920 doesn't apply, and this is the worst of them, we would lose 145,000 and both the amounts of the 604 plus the 254,000 that we would have. So that's about 850 some thousand dollars. So we would lose $1 million at that point. Lose it. So we know that that's about 2.5 mils. If a mill's about 400,000 that we would have to go out just to make it up if HB 920 doesn't apply, which is their intent. So if they're trying to reduce taxes altogether, reduce the flat tax, well, they want to reduce property taxes. They don't want to raise it. But they can't get around the hurdle of HB 920. I don't think they understood that.
The irony is, the people that have proposed the legislation can't give you these numbers. It's taken the treasurers in the state of Ohio to calculate it out. So the people that have written this law can't give you those numbers right now.
And that kind of goes to a question I had, which is, I believe there's an entity, is it the Legislative Services Commission?
The Legislative Service Commission
Is
has
charged with,
calculating out the
Analyzing all-
financial impact.
okay, has that entity yet done its analysis of HB1?
I haven't seen the number from the Legislative Service Commission yet.
Okay. That would be interesting to see how that
And-
commission comes out.
And I think as of last Friday, part of that was because 920, they didn't know how 920 was gonna affect it in the legislative, but if they don't apply 920, that'll be in court the next day. The school districts and municipalities are saying, listen, if you're not letting us grow with growth, you sure as hell aren't gonna let us shrink when you start taking money away from us. It's gotta work in both directions. 920 was the freeze. It didn't freeze from going up or just going up, not going down. So that'll be the argument. Like I said, I think they're probably writing some of those briefs right now as one approach to this, so.
And two more things too. This is just the adjusting of the 35 to 31.5. Keep in mind that we also get about 300,000 in rollback credits that they were talking about not giving the school districts. So I don't know if we're tacking on 300,000 on top of the million essentially that we'd lose. So it could be even higher. Because I'm not sure I fully understand what they're trying to say with not paying those out and how that would work.
Well, the rollbacks come from the county, don't they?
But the state of Ohio, gives the rollbacks.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the state that gives it? I thought it came from the county.
No, the state of Ohio pays those amounts that we get that twice a year.
Just to, Ms. Etter, I think what happens is the taxpayer, the individual resident, gets a benefit because of qualifying for that rollback, but the state subsidizes that gift to the taxpayer by sending a check to the district to make up for that loss. So say you're subject to 920 rollback and you get 3,000 off your taxes, the county says, yeah, you don't have to pay that $3,000, but then the county, as I understand it, submits a bill to the state and says, hey, we paid Ms. Etter $3,000, yada, yada, you get it.
Yeah, okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
I could be
Mine
wrong.
too.
Okay.
I agree.
So when the Legislative Services Commission weighs in on this, it'd be interesting to see what's included within this and what isn't and what the effects are. But boy, time is growing short. This is March already.
Why do they have to make it so complicated?
Amongst all this bad news, Cuyahoga Heights is up 40 to 27 at the end of the third quarter.
40 to 27? They're ahead?
All right.
Okay.
So what I did is I opened the calculator that we have here, and all you have to do at the top is just go and you can select other schools. Let's look at Brecksville. So if we're at Brecksville right now, what the impact would be, if we scroll down, if we're looking
Wow.
at just those last two, they would have to ask their taxpayers for about 2.7 million to pick
Yeah.
up. And this is if HB 920 applies, scenario one, the better of the two. And then they'd lose about 600,000 from the budget, Brecksville. And I'll look at just one more independent schools. Look at that one.
It's pretty cool that it's all in there.
Yeah, it's all the effective rates. That's how this works. It's really just figuring that out. So independence.
You got me singing my alphabet in my head.
Yep. So independence here. So we're at independent schools right now, our neighbor, and that's where they're at. So they would have to ask their taxpayers for just under 800,000, and they would lose 500,000 in their budget. We're very similar to independence with our budget and with the state aid. So we're hurt a little less on this because ours is 250 and about 150,000. But we can see the impact to, our neighbors down the street. It's more, and it's more negative than ours too. So, but this is a great tool to use that, I think a lot of schools have a talking point to go to their, legislatures and, Congress people and say, hey, look, I have a tool now that's showing me, our school's impact and what this potentially could cost property tax owners out there and what money we would lose from that. And this is just class one and inside millage. If they can roll in class two, this makes it even better for us to communicate that message out, I think. So.
But again, the property taxes they're gonna increase anyway under this bill. We're just getting less money. So then we have to go and say, your bill just went up, but we got less money.
They took money, we now have to make up the difference, so.
We just got an
Yeah.
increase and we're asking, just to hold even, we have to ask.
So they're taking from one pocket, or they're giving you money in one pocket with a flat rate of your income tax, but yet you're gonna have to pay more from the other pocket.
Assuming you're at some marginal tax rate above 2 3/4 now. If you're not,
You're not even gonna get.
then you're gonna pay more in real estate taxes perhaps, and
That's
you
the
won't,
benefit of the
Oh.
you
income
won't see
tax.
the benefit of
I
the income
see
tax
what you're
rate.
saying, if you're not at,
If
if
you're,
You
you're
wanna
not
see the benefit of
above
the
two
income
point
tax.
75%
that's
for
right,
your income tax.
Yeah.
that's right, and I'm not gonna speculate.
Well, where do you have to be?
Well, I'll send that out. They've got a little graph that I saw in one of the On the Moneys that had a breakout of the income tax, and what groups would be
The
affected.
brackets.
Yeah, the brackets.
Now, since this affects so many schools, and we saw the hundreds of millions that it affects, I'm pretty confident that we're going to see a lot of government entities, probably led by schools, that come out with resolutions in opposition, and you're going to start seeing this in the news. So I think that's pretty much a slam dunk.
Well, Mr. Mucho, as I told you before in an email, I appreciate your research, your rolling up the sleeves and doing the analysis that's district-specific, that helps us understand all these moving parts and how complex this is. And to you and Mr. Evans, I would ask you to let us know as a board what we can do to help get the word out, as well as to join in opposition to this. And I'm just gonna speak for myself, I don't know what the other board members think, but if that's a consensus of the board, I'd be more than happy to join you, but please let us know what we can do.
And I was talking with Mr. Evans, and I was just kind of, brainstorming, and, we were kind of putting it together, craft bullet points, email out letters to, various Congress people that would have an effect on this, as well as maybe see if the Alliance for High Quality or any other organization puts forward a, good template that school districts or government entities can use to say this is a resolution in opposition. And then we can also take that resolution and email that to, the various lawmakers in the state and say, this asked by the Cagaya's Board of Education, we're in opposition to what we perceive in our understanding are the effects from HB1 and how it has a negative outcome on our entire district that we would have, not just students, but anybody that resides in the district. And it's a lot, you could say that across the whole state in essence. So, if we have that resolution in opposition, then we have, a couple good bullet points, and we can really start peppering emails out to get our voices heard.
I would ask one other thing, in all of your analysis of this, if at some point you could figure out what the projected loss, what percentage is that of our budget?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a good way of people, like, understanding it. Like, if you said it's, I'll just throw out a number, again, I don't know. It's 5% of our budget. Let's just say that's what it is, but it might be more, I don't know. And you went to someone and you said, so, this is what's happening in your family today. You've got 5% less money to spend on your household, on what you need every day, every month. It might equate better with people,
I think it's safe to say, and I can really pinpoint that, but just, broadly, we can say it's about 8%, give or take.
And I think it's important that as we approach legislators with this, that we put dollar signs, dollar amounts in there. I think that's important to as well, so.
Mr. Evans, you said early in your presentation that we are an unusual district in a lot of senses, but one of them is that we have a population that's largely, has a lower median family income relative to some other higher performing districts. And I wonder if that kind of dovetails with this conversation about how the income tax rate might be reduced, but it might be of very little benefit to our residents because we're not subject to higher income levels.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
for what it's worth.
At some point, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if we get a breakdown of our communities and where they fall in the income tax bracket, like, on average.
I mean,
I don't really know.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything that,
but every school's gonna be affected. So a school like Westlake, for example, a good high-achieving school, but their income over there is higher than ours too, but they're gonna be affected as well. It's not like it's, it's just, it seems like it would affect a school like us more because we're smaller.
It seems like now would be a good time to, from even being at the last conference, one of the former superintendents, Paul Ehoff, was talking about, what should we do now? And, he was of the opinion, I agree with him, that now is a great time to use our voices to effectively stop this piece of legislation, in the early stages and say, hey, there's just too much of a negative outcome. Everybody's rising up to say that this is not good. And then, to try as early as we can to stop it in its tracks before we get some steam, put some amendments out to it.
Yeah, I think the reality is, once it gets in the media, like you said, the headline is gonna be, the state is cutting income tax. Like
exactly,
what
that's gonna,
and-
you're 100% correct,
And
so.
they're doing it this way also, so they don't have to say
Right.
they're cutting school funding.
Right.
Because they're not, they're giving us they're lowering the income tax.
Yeah,
And it's not gonna matter, the nuance of like, yeah, but most people aren't paying for, and yeah, but your property tax is gonna go up, is never gonna get.
you're 100% accurate, so it's gonna be incumbent upon school districts themselves to get that message out, so, yeah, and which is why I said, I said, 2.75, whoa, yeah, everybody loves that, but here's what the cost of that is, on our back, so.
The interpretation's so complex
Yeah.
that, it's really hard to pinpoint, exactly what's gonna happen with this. So I don't think anybody is necessarily, wrong in critiquing it, because there's really no right, they haven't come out and said this is actually what they wanna do, and we still have two scenarios that we're looking at.
Yeah.
We don't even know exactly what we know.
158.33
Oh my gosh,
in the regional final.
Final?
Final,
All
yep.
right,
Yeah, great job.
Final 8,
all right.
all right.
down to the final
Moving
8.
up.
So relative to your presentations, I'm wondering what the group, as well as you two, who have done all the hard work, what you think about building into our next agendas for work sessions, some type of an update on these things,
It's gonna
because,
be a constant update on this, and
Okay.
what Matt and I, our next task is gonna be to develop bullet points,
Mhm.
so we can start sending some emails, letters, whatever it might be, out to, and then also, as I start to give these, we talk about this with our staff and some other people, say, hey, listen, you wanna get on board now, and say, they need to hear it constant and steady from every place in the state, because it truly does affect everybody, so.
And there's a timing aspect too. If they cut, is there gonna be, let's say this goes through, and let's say scenario one is it, are they gonna do something similar to the TPP phase out, where they're gonna hold schools effectively harmless and give you some money to kind of get along the way, but who knows how much that is, and we know, you can't just take money away. Everything's embedded in the 5-year forecast. It's like a cake. You can't pull out the sugar and the flour, everything's there. But if they do, you don't get a cake at the end if you pull out the sugar. So if they do that, to put a levy on, there's timing aspects. We don't collect all the revenue right away. We collect it in different fiscal years. And there's still all the expenses that we have, purchase services, for special education. You name it. We have just a multitude of impacts that, there's so many ripples in it, if it were to go through that, I don't even know where to begin.
Now's the time it has to happen too. Once it makes its way into the budget bill, it'll be hard to affect.
Well, please let us know whatever we can do to try and get the message out and to let our voice be heard. Thank you, very good presentations. If that concludes that part of our agenda, I'll move on to public comments. There are none tonight, so we can move on to item 5, treasurer's business.
Yeah, roll that into the consent, and I would ask for a motion to approve the treasurer's business consent agenda motions as presented.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve the treasurer's consent agenda item, which I believe is just approval of the prior meeting's minutes? Am I
Yes.
right? Okay, so I have a motion for that, please.
So moved.
Ms. Decker gets the move.
You did.
Mr. Shockey, you want to be a second?
I'll be second.
All right, second. Any additional comments,
second,
Mr.
please.
Muccio? Okay, so let's move to a vote then, please.
Mrs. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Suchek?
Aye.
Mrs. Epp?
Aye.
Ms. Press?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Mr. Muccio, treasurer's discussion and comments.
Yeah, just had one final item, item 7A. Got a call from Matt Goldman today, asked 2 things. Number one, if we could sign this exit waiver. I'll just pass that down for everybody to sign, wanting it for his audit. And item 2 was, he was looking to schedule all of our exit conferences for our audits, as well as our entrance conference for the new audit. He was thinking, he's like, Matt, can you see about an hour before the next board meeting, the 22nd? Figured I'd throw it out there, but could conflict with a finance committee meeting that we're thinking about scheduling at that same time. So I wanted to throw it. I don't think it's a problem if we go back to Matt and say, for this audit, exit, and entrance conference, could we have it, maybe before our work session in April, or even the second meeting in April? But I wanted to throw that out, because I know the work session's a little earlier than our regular meeting.
What's
Is
the
that
group-
finance meeting set in stone?
Not yet, Matt has not yet published it.
I think I actually am not available the 22nd before 7. I'm gonna be there.
But to be a parent,
Yeah. Actually, it's a work thing.
Maybe we have 3 options, like, if it doesn't work out, the second meeting of March, the 2 meetings in April, we want to do it before board meeting, this audit. Excellent.
Personally, I wouldn't mind adding it or having it precede our April work session, but it's whatever the group, whatever works for the schedules, as well as you and Matt Goldman. But I'm fine with that approach.
How does that look for everybody before the April work session? So the first meeting?
April 5th?
It's April, is it April? No, it's not 8th. April
So that would be
5th.
at 5 o'clock then, on that day? Or do we push the other meeting back to 7?
Maybe 5:30 and 6:30?
I could send out a notice that we move the work session to 7, and then have the audit meeting at 6.
If he needs a full hour, I don't even know how much he needs.
For the upcoming one or the April one?
For the April 5th, so the first meeting in April. Or we could keep the meeting time as is at 6 o'clock, and then see if,
How much time do you think he needs?
I think an hour is more than enough.
Yeah.
Probably looking at realistically like a half hour.
Can you do it within a meeting?
If we give him a half hour, will he take a half hour? But if we give him an hour, will he take an hour?
Well, when I used to more space you would give us, we'd spread out, so it's kind of, you know,
Same thing.
you give me a small table, I'm spreading out, you know, if you give me a large one, I'm spreading out all over the place.
Yeah, I don't think Matt would take a full hour.
Yeah, I think
I
it's fine.
agree, I think Matt wants to be done and out.
Yeah.
Matt Golden, from the years that he's been here, and
Can you do it as part of the work session? Can you do it as part of the April work session? Just at 6 o'clock, the first thing we get is the,
Yep,
just do it at the beginning of the April work
Sure.
session meeting.
yep, and then we can just recess, go out, and then come back in once.
You know,
Yeah, that has to be done in executive session, correct?
It's their meeting, so this is kind of like a special session where
Yeah.
they
That's fine.
invite us in,
Well,
so it's not quite.
We just add it to the agenda.
Yeah,
It's
we
got
got
different rules, as I recall.
Okay. If that's what the group wants to do, I'm fine with it.
as long as none of you promise to yell at Matt, everything will be fine, because he went through that before. Goldman,
Really? Who would have yelled at?
don't you remember? Oh my God,
I remember.
he came under attack at one of the,
He wants to come back?
not him and the guy and his bosses as well came under fire.
I think he knows that we wouldn't need,
Right, you know,
it's
that,
not gonna happen anymore.
Okay, so I'll let Matt know 6 PM on the first meeting of April, which is April 5th. That's all I have for now.
Sounds good. So we would do that first thing, first order of business at 6 PM. Okay.
And do it like, almost like an executive session, so we'd start the meeting, go into this meeting, and then come back. Okay,
Very good.
got it?
You had another discussion item, the calculator. Have you covered that, Mr. Muccio? Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Evans, agenda item 8, please.
just wanted to put on approved parent volunteers for the 2023 eighth grade Washington DC trip, which takes place next week. We've got 2 parent volunteers, they're gonna go as chaperones with us.
So we need a motion then to approve that item, which constitutes the entire consent agenda for Mr. Evans. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Ms. Decamus, a second from Ms. Eder, okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Mr. Evans?
Nope.
Okay, so let's move to a vote, please.
Mrs. Decker?
Aye.
Mrs. Etter?
Aye.
Mr. Souchaki?
Aye.
Ms. Prowse?
Aye.
Mr. Knight?
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Moving on to Mr. Evans' discussion comments.
Just that, I previously forwarded you some information about the membership in the Ohio Coalition for Equity and Adequacy for School Funding. I think I scanned in and sent you out some of the stuff that they sent us back in the fall. That's the group that is trying to sue the state over the legality of vouchers. And my recommendation early on was that we not jump into that because I didn't think it was gonna get to the lawsuit phase, but it has. At some point in time, the state has said, yes, you can sue over this, so we weren't sure it was gonna get there. So I think they're starting to get some momentum. There's about over 100 districts that are involved in it currently in this. The cost for us to be a part of this would be $2 per student, which is about $1,600 as a district to have our name be a part of that as well, and we would pass a resolution. So I'm just putting feelers out there to see any feedback from the board on this. And just so you know the history of that coalition, when that coalition was formed back in the 1990s, Cuyahoga Heights was a charter member of that group when Bill Phillips formed that group. When Pete Guerrero was superintendent, we were one of the first groups that were in on that coalition. And then this is the group that's continually pushed DeRolf back, has continually fought for fair school funding. And now they want to take on the vouchers, and it looks like they're getting some steam. And I think $1,600 is not too big a price to have our name on that line along with it. So, but there were some other things they have some really informative videos. I sent you some stuff there. I think there's some really good information. This has been Bill Phillips has been in charge of this forever, Bill. When I started teaching, Bill was the state supervisor, and I thought Bill was old then. I can't imagine that after 42 years of me in education now. Bill must be 120 or something, but he's still sharp as a tack and he's passionate about this, and he's taken this on. And Steve Dyer, if you've read anything, Steve Dyer was a former state legislator who's now very active in this. Steve's a really bright guy and presents some good arguments. So I think that this is a group that you may want to consider. So if you got questions about that, give me a call. I'll get a feel between now and the next meeting if that's something that the board might be in favor of. If you are, then I'll make sure I'll put it on the form of a motion at the next meeting. So if you have any additional questions, I'll try and send you out some more information about the process that they're in right now as far as the lawsuit's concerned, so.
Just to confirm, this has nothing to do with the back end, so
No,
it's about current voucher.
like voucher laws, they're saying vouchers, their approach is that vouchers are illegal, period. That the state should not be spending money on private education is the kind of foundation of their lawsuit.
And to Mr. Evans' point, one of the emails that you forwarded to us from this group had embedded within it about a 15 or 20-minute kind of PowerPoint presentation. I don't know how many people have had a chance to go through that, but there's a couple of kind of bullet point, talking point slides that lays out or presents the sum and substance of their argument, their legal arguments for arguing that the vouchers are unconstitutional according to the Ohio Constitution.
I'll try and pull those out separately and make sure that you.
Yeah, that one slide, there's one or two slides that really crystallize what's at play or what this group is fighting for. I'll also mention that the same group sent around an invitation to a webinar that I attended just before this meeting today, and it was, it had a panel of attorneys from around the country that have been involved in litigation on this same point about the constitutionality of vouchers within various states, New Hampshire, Kentucky, New Hampshire and Kentucky come to mind. Those were frequently talked about. So there is a pretty deep network of people that are working on this case, or on these causes.
Yeah, are they trying to do, is this unconstitutional versus, based on the state constitution?
Based on the state constitution,
Okay.
based on the way the state constitution is worded, that, in regards to that, so they're saying that it's illegal for the state to create these, to create vouchers.
Okay.
And that was one of the takeaways from this webinar today, is that it's really dependent upon what each state's constitution says or doesn't say. Well, I won't go into the rest of it. So,
I also watched the presentation, and it was very, very informative, and I took some notes, and I have some printouts I can pass along if you guys.
Excellent.
oh, good.
Good.
Well, please follow up with Mr. Evans if you have individual questions and comments, and perhaps we'll see this at our next, on the next agenda. Okay. Do you have any other comments or discussion items, Mr. Evans?
No,
Okay.
go Red Wolves.
Yeah, they did it. They did it.
They play the winner of the game
Congratulations.
that's going on right now, which is Lutheran East, and somebody, Mike fully anticipated it would be Lutheran East.
That's what the PD was suggesting today.
Lutheran East is Richmond Heights Light.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 11A, we would need a motion to approve attendance at the list of professional conferences. So may I have a motion to approve attendance at these two conferences? Motion, please.
So moved.
Mr. Souchaki moves, I'll second. And then I'll just chime in, and Mr. Evans, you do the same, please. This first one is the State Legislative Conference, and we've, all of our board members have been invited to that. It's being sponsored by OSBA, and I believe Mr. Souchaki is going to attend or planning to attend if we approve this?
Yes.
Okay, great. If anyone else wants to or has the time to attend, please, we can add you to the motion. And Mr. Evans?
Yeah. I'll be down, I'm gonna coordinate, because I'm actually down there I would get down there normally that night for the first ring, but I'm gonna get down there earlier that day, so, I can schedule, meetings for Gary and myself with, Senator Dolan and our representatives ahead of time.
Very good, thank you. Well, if there's nothing else, then let's move to a vote on that, please.
Mr. Souchaki?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mrs. Decker?
Aye.
Mrs. Leonard?
Aye.
Ms. Brown?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to agenda item number 12. Mr. Evans, are you substituting for Mr. Young?
And
Policy bylaws?
absolutely, I am not substituting for Mr. Young.
Okay.
I don't want to jump into those shoes, but board policy reviews and bylaws, several policies for review. I think there's one or two new ones, and all the rest of these are revisions. These are all changes in law, so any changes that we've made in these policies are reflective of the law, and they mirror what provisions we've had in these right now. The first one is policy 1031.1, technical corrections. That's new. That's a first reading for a new policy on a state law that's been passed. Policy 2114, meeting state performance indicators. That's revised because the performance index has changes in the law there. 2271, College Credit Plus programs. Again, that's revised, and there's been some law changes to that. Most of the College Credit Plus, I think, refers to, these changes refer to veterans that we haven't, or people that may be relocated during the course of the class. 2412 Homebound Instruction Program, that's revised. 3120.09 Rescind Volunteers, revised, first reading of that one. 4120.09, that's essentially the same policy in a different section on volunteers. 8120 Replacement Volunteers, first reading on that one. Health Services, 5310, 5460 Graduation Requirements, first reading. That doesn't make any effective change. It adds some of the items that we've already had in our curriculum. 5610 Removal, Suspension, Expulsion, and Permanent Exclusion of Students. Again, a revision on that one. 6325 Procurement for Federal Funding and Grants, revised. This is kind of as is. 8390 Animals on District Property, this is revised, and this does a little to distinguish between service animals and support animals. So there was some clarification was needed on that. Policy 8400 School Safety, a revision there. Emergency Situations in Schools, 8420 Situations at Schools, revised, first reading there. 8462 Student Abuse and Neglect, those are all revisions based on recent passages of law. What I will do is, Matt gave me the summations from Neola. I'll scan these and send these to you, because this kind of is a synopsis of what changes have taken place in each of those. And what we have done is we've gone exactly the way Neola wants us to go with those items. So we haven't deviated from Neola's recommendations on these.
Very good. I just have a couple observations. One, on 2114, the policy 2114, I think that policy is really interesting because it really goes to kind of the sum and the heart of what we're trying to do as a district, which is ensure that our kids get outstanding educations, and everyone is working toward that same goal. And for us to reduce that to a policy, I think is pretty commendable. And it reflects a concerted effort by so many people to achieve those ends.
And it really addresses the change from grades to stars in
Yeah.
that system. So.
But to have that reduced to
Right.
writing and to be something that's aspirational for us as a district, I think is important, or at least to me it is. So with that, then there'll be a final reading of these then at the March 22nd meeting.
I will tell you, the state report card always begins with very lofty goals for the end of it, and we start here, and we never seem to be able to quite get to that end mark. One of the things that, an advantage for us is that now that Matt Young is a member of BASA, so Matt is on the report card committee, so I think that's been a real valuable experience for Matt to be part of that report card committee, because nobody knows it better in Northeast Ohio than he does. It's coming and going, so I think that's a really good representation for us with BASA, to have Matt down there working with the GAC committee.
Great. One of the other policies that we're doing a first reading on is the graduation one. And my understanding is that we as a district have established a minimum graduation requirement that exceeds the state minimums. And I think, again, that's pretty
Correct.
pretty commendable, and we should applaud that, or I should.
And what they're doing now is they're you'll notice in some of the recent legislation too, they're going to start to create issues for school districts, because they're trying to pigeonhole where those credits are. You know, obviously financial literacy was a big add-on, and we embed financial literacy into our social studies curriculum, so we're able to meet that. But the more specific the legislature gets with specific requirements, the more difficult that makes it for schools. We have an advantage because we have a 9-period day, so we can still do a little juggling. Districts that have 7-period days around block scheduling, they don't have any room at all. So when the state wants to incorporate something new, some of those districts say we can't add it in a regular school day type thing. I think you see schools going to some alternative methods, some early bird classes, and some after school, which we have the ability to do in our contract with our teachers. We've negotiated that, and we could run some early bird and some after school if we saw a need for that. So it's really trying to, at some point, schools are going to have to be more flexible as long as the state keeps kind of jumping on with some of these add-ons for them. So
Very good, thank you. So before we expand the conversation about board discussion, committee reports, et cetera, at our last meeting on February 22nd, I thought there was an item that we should serve on our police department for several decades, and unfortunately, he passed away on December 11th of 2022. But I'm sure we all appreciate he and his family's service to the district and their recent establishment of a scholarship in his name.
One of the originators of the DARE here in Cuyahoga Heights Schools as well. And, yeah, just, Joe was always, you know, when the district needed something, Joe was always there.
Absolutely. I also want to cover some administrative items. One of them is the Finance Committee that Mr. Muccio talked about earlier. And I think we agreed that tonight we're going to plan to publish that for 5:30. Is that right, Mr. Muccio? On the 22nd? And that would precede the board meeting on that date? Okay. Ms. Decker, is that good for you? Okay. And then I believe there's a BEST committee meeting that say, is it March 30th, Mr. Evans? Evans? Thursday, March 30th, I believe. 5:30
Sounds right.
soft start, and I believe the program starts at 6. With that, I don't have anything else. Does anyone else have anything for the group,
I did.
please?
I just wanted to acknowledge that board member Mark Dobbins made the Journal of Iowa School Boards Association, and he talked about local business support. It says OSBA's Business Honor World Program provides a unique forum for our district to recognize some of the many important contributions that our local businesses make to the success of our schools, said Cuyahoga Heights Local Board President Mark Dobbins. Went on to say, our district is very fortunate to have so many diverse businesses that provide support in numerous ways to our schools, students, and communities. We're very grateful for their support and to OSBA for sponsoring this program. And I just wanted to acknowledge this and say I'm glad that this got printed, and because it also is important that we publicly appreciate and the generosity of our business partners from our communities.
Couldn't agree more. I'm really glad that OSBA has this program for us to put the spotlight on the so many ways that our businesses support us, and it's just countless, that there's so many people that help us, help our students achieve good outcomes.
We are fortunate for their generosity. I just wanted to make sure that we said that publicly. And are we deciding whether or not to go to the Northeast Region Spring Conference, either on March 27th or the 28th? Do we need to go?
I talked to Reno, if we decide to come, they're gonna recognize whoever shows up with a certificate for our students participating in the Student Achievement Fair at OSBA. If I'm being completely selfish, Smithville's closer to home for me, although Smithville or Warren, one's 47 miles from here, the other's 48 miles from here.
Okay.
So,
Would it be, we'd have to know
the
which,
same program in both places. So the region's split, so we can go to either place, and Reno will see that we're there, and Reno will know that we're coming, because we're gonna make reservations, so
Yeah.
they'll present us. That's-
what about the people who were involved with that? Like, that was involving the Allison Rose Foundation.
Yeah, it would be it would probably be, we haven't invited students to it before, but the students really did kind of man the booth for us, so. That's a recognition of the board that they're having students to participate more than it is the actual.
Right. It's up to decide if we want to go, or together, or any one person that would like to go. It's Monday the 27th in Warren, or Tuesday the 28th in Smithville.
Well, am I going to Smithville since we beat them last week anyhow, so part of my determination was whether or not we won the basketball game last Saturday, because had we lost to them, I would have said we're going to Warren for sure.
I've been to Warren, I don't think I've ever been to Smithville.
This is at Wayne County Career Center, which is right in downtown Smithville. It's right, Route 3 runs right through Smithville.
I don't know.
Do we need to put that on the agenda for the 22nd, or is that
Yes.
too late?
I'll put it on.
Okay, we'll put it on the agenda, and whoever can make it.
I'll put it in the Friday update. If you have an interest, let me know. I can tentatively make reservations for anybody that wants to attend.
Okay, very good, thank you. Mrs. Etter, do you have any other comments? this evening?
No, with this voice, I don't think I should speak any longer.
I'm glad
Thank
you
you.
pointed out that that was Mrs. Etter that was actually talking a moment ago.
Yeah.
Does anyone,
Tried to find out if they would come again next year and that kind of stuff, and I actually picked up a few interesting things about jobs available in all sorts of strange places, but very technical fields that I didn't even know existed, so it was a good time, and
well, then let's move on to future agenda items, 14A. I do have one item, and that is, when we get to the March 22nd agenda, I would hope that we'd have a motion on there to reschedule the May 10th board meeting to May 3rd. We've talked about that previously, meets everyone's needs. So that would give us plenty of time to, there'd be a motion on the March 22nd agenda, hopefully, to reschedule the May 10th meeting to May 3rd. And I think everyone's looked at their calendars and said that works. So that's it, unless there's any other agenda items. Move on to 15A. It should be noted the Board of Education members received their agendas several days prior to the actual meeting. Thus, they've had considerable time to study it, ask questions, etc. Upcoming regular meetings. Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023 at 7 p.m. Wednesday, April 5th, 2023 at 6 p.m. Wednesday, where'd it go? Okay, Wednesday, April 19th at 7 p.m. And we were likely going to change the Wednesday, March 10th to Wednesday, March 3rd, depending on what the board does at the next meeting. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Ms. Etter moves, I'll second. I don't think we need any discussion. Let's do a roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Etter?
Aye.
Mr. Duffy?
Aye.
Mrs. Decker?
Aye.
Mr. Check?
Aye.
Ms. Rouse?
Hi.
Motion passes 5-0. It's 7:38 p.m. and we are adjourned. Thank you.
I'm gonna hand these out. These are projections for 24, 25 funding to every school district in the state.